Hey, what's going on everyone? It's Surefire, and welcome to the video, where today we're going to talk about the Roman Pantheon, and the mythology covered around it. I do want to state that there will be comparisons to the Greeks, but this is a necessity only because of the origins of the mythos, as well as how similar they are to one another. So the Roman mythology is a body of traditional stories in the form of literature and visual arts that cover the origins of the Romans and their religious system. Just like the Greeks, the traditional narratives were seen as historical fact, regardless of any supernatural elements that occur in these stories. So while the origins of the Roman mythology is the city of Rome in the Magna Graecia, or Italian peninsula, due to the presence of the Greeks and the Etruscan people, there were influences that were incorporated into the early stages of the mythology. We see very similar gods and locations that exist in the Greek mythology, while the Etruscan culture was assimilated into the Romans, after the Etruscan loss in the Roman-Etruscan War. Looking into the literature of the Romans, we can see many sources depicting their mythology, which would make sense considering that it was seen as a part of Roman history. Important books we can look to are the very first historical books of Livy, which were known as the Ab Urbicondia Libri, which just covered the founding of Rome by the story of Romulus and Remus. There's also the Roman Antiquities by Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the Fasti by Ovid, a sixth poem that was structured by the Roman religious calendar, and the fourth book of Eliades by Propertius. Another book that is well known is the Aeneid, the 12-book Latin epic by Virgil. Aeneid tells the story of Aeneas, a Trojan warrior who traveled to Italy and became an ancestor to the Romans. The first 6 books are about his journey to Italy, while the second 6 are about the war in Italy. We also see scenes from Roman myths appear on art forms from the time, these being wall paintings, sculptures, especially reliefs, and even currency of the time. When it comes to organizing our gods with this pantheon, we are left with many options, as there exist many lists. Although each list was seen as semi-official, there was not too much consensus in the pantheon, as the Romans' views allowed their pantheon to be fluid and ever-expanding, having not only their own gods, but the neighboring gods added as well. While looking into the Pantheon list, we see very popular choices coming from the historian Titus Livy and the scholar Marcus Tenerus of Varro. The closest list that we have to an official pantheon comes from the Triad, a group of 3 deities that were worshipped on Rome's Capitoline Hill. The list, however, did change over time, with the only god constant being Jupiter. After this, we had groupings of 12 that would house the other gods, which were very similar to the grouping of gods to the Greek pantheon's gods of Mount Olympus. Varro also categorized the gods with his collectives, a grouping of gods where he would place each god based on whether the god were heavenly, terrestrial, or of the underworld. Looking at the cosmology of the Romans, we see it as near identical to the Greeks, but there still existed differences between the two. The very first and obvious one was Mount Olympus. Since the Olympus mountain did not exist in Rome, it is very likely that the gods lived on Mount Vicinius, as this was a mountain much closer to Rome. That said, there still was a form of heaven where the gods lived, still an earth as it was known at the time, and still an underworld containing an Elysium-type area as well as Tartarus. Looking at an afterlife, however, we can see that this is where there is the biggest difference between the Greeks and the Romans, as the Romans were much more concerned about the prospect of an afterlife. To the Romans, we had a soul, and the soul was an immortal being, and as such would exist upon our death. To this end, we would see a consequential form of an afterlife, in which our souls were judged by a tribunal, most likely Pluto. Upon judgment, if one was seen as good, they would go to an Elysium Fields, a paradise land for the dead, or if they were evil, they would be sent to Tartarus, an awful place guarded by a hydra and surrounded by flame. At this point, I'm sure everyone is tired of me comparing the Greeks and the Romans, but there was a reason for this. I did this because of the last point that I was going to do, which would be the introduction of the differences that existed between the two. While there is a fair bit of differences between the two main points I want to focus on are their different views on gods, and I want to reiterate the difference of their views in the afterlife. As we look at the gods, we see an immediate difference between the two and how they existed. To the Greeks, we are aware that the gods were seen as very beautiful beings, of gorgeous physique, beautiful eyes, and well-mannered hair. Ignoring their personalities, which were flawed, they in appearance were perfect, just as a god should be. The Romans, however, did not see the gods this way. Gods did not tend to be gender-specific, and gods' characteristics were not central to their myths. In fact, the gods did not have a physical form, but instead were represented in people's imaginations. And while the Greek gods were based off of human traits, the Roman gods were based on objects and actions. Now, in terms of the afterlife, we did just cover this, so I just want to reiterate this and get this stuck in your head that there was a difference between the two cultures, and this would probably shape their views on each side. As stated, the Greeks had little importance of an afterlife and saw more importance placed onto their physical life. To the Romans, however, they saw it was an afterlife that was more important, as this was where they would be spending eternity. As such, they would do what they could to achieve good deeds in order to have the best afterlife possible, rather than spend an eternity in Tartarus. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of the video. I do hope you enjoyed watching and got something out of it. If you have anything to add or expand on, or any concerns based on the information provided, then please leave it in the comment section below. Feel free to like the video as well if you did enjoy watching, and consider subscribing if you like my content as a whole. Also follow me on social media to keep up to date with my channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Surefire out. Bye!